Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you might be joining us from today. My name is Meg Alexander, and I am, as always, honored and excited to get to host another Power to Fly Chat and Learn virtual event. Today, we're going to be talking about the power of authenticity with Elastic, embracing your true self in life and in leadership. Now, before we dive in here, I just want to real quickly flash our code of conduct on the screen. This looks like a big scary wall of legalese, but basically what it all breaks down to is don't be a jerk. Okay. Just navigate from a place of kindness and respect. And it's pretty hard to go wrong from there. If you have any questions on this or you'd like some more info, please feel free to DM me. You can find my name, Meg Alexander, in the dropdown, or you can always email our help desk. Our help desk inbox is hi@powerfly.com. Now, the rest of this is going to look pretty familiar if today is not your first Power to Fly event. But if it is, welcome! We're so happy to meet you. Now, the love is no less real for my frequent flyers. Thank you to everybody who joins us today in the chat. I love seeing your familiar names and faces and avatars. So thank you all so much for taking time to spend today with Elastic and Power to Fly. Now, as we get going for today's event, the biggest thing for you all to know is that participation is key. If you want to participate, we very much encourage it. You can do so in a number of ways. If you want to, you are always encouraged to turn your cameras on if you'd like, to share your smiling, maskless faces with us safely. But there is no need to be Instagram perfect, y'all. Just because you are sitting on your couch in a messy bun makes no difference to us. We do not care if you're coming to us from a kitchen table or a corner office. We just want to meet you where you are. Now, if you do want to participate, but you don't want to do so on camera, that's okay. You can always chime in the chat. You're welcome to ask questions. Let us know your thoughts. If you want us to dive in deeper on an issue or something, please feel free to let us know there. Now, we are recording today's event, and what that means for all of you is you don't have to take notes. You get to sit back and enjoy the conversation that I'm about to have with Morgan from Elastic and not have to worry if you missed a resource that was listed or a link or anything like that. So what's going to happen is everybody that registered, even if you aren't able to join us today, that's okay, don't worry. Everybody that registered is going to get a link from or going to get an email from Power to Fly next week. And it's going to contain the link to where you can watch this recording when it goes live on powertofly.com. Now, we are currently broadcasting to our YouTube channel. Hi, YouTube. And so you can watch us over there. The video is also usually posted to our YouTube channel by end of business today. But like I said, if you want to go and share this stuff sooner, that's great. I very much recommend that you check out our YouTube channel. I'm going to share links for all of this in the chat thread as we go. But I very much encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. It's got a ton of our best, kind of our greatest hits from our Power to Fly chat and learns. Some of the stuff that we found the most helpful or that you all enjoyed the most. But I always encourage you to check out powertofly.com as well, because that is where our true, trove of resources lay. So if you have questions or want to learn more, do not hesitate to head over to powertofly.com and check us out there. Now, if you got questions, you can always use that Q&A field in the Zoom toolbar, or you can send in your questions in the group chat. Either way, I'll be grabbing as many of those as we can, so hopefully we can answer your questions today. Now, I'm very excited to introduce Elastic to y'all. I know many of you are familiar with them already, but in case you're not, Elastic is the search AI company, and they enable everyone to find the answers that y'all need in real time using all of Elastic's data at scale, unleashing the potential of businesses and people. Now, the Elasticsearch AI platform is used by more than 50% of the Fortune 500, and it brings together the precision of search and the intelligence of AI to enable everyone to accelerate the results that matter. Now, by taking advantage of all structured and unstructured data, securing and protecting private information more effectively, Elastic's complete cloud-based solutions for search, security, and observability help their organizations to deliver on the promise of AI. Now, I'm very excited to learn more about Elastic and introduce you to the amazing representative they've sent us today, Morgan Kirkland. Now, Morgan is a global vice president of sales development, where he brings over 20 years of experience in management and senior leadership to the role. As a former Big Ten offensive lineman, Morgan combines his strategic acumen with a commanding presence to eliminate barriers and drive results. Morgan's leadership philosophy is anchored in optimizing people, processes, systems, data, governance, and performance to achieve transformative outcomes, where he has successfully delivered more than $1 billion in executed business. Morgan, I'm very, very happy to have you grace our stage today. Is there anything else that you would like our audience members to know about you before we dive in on questions?
Well, certainly we'll jump into it, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Nevertheless, I love your energy, Meg. It's interesting. I would just suggest the one thing often when people talk or associate being an offensive lineman, they think about this big person. And what I tell people is, although I'm a big old teddy bear, I'm still a bear. And despite being a big bear, what's unique about being a former offensive lineman, the one fun fact that people often don't know about me is prior to participating as part of the University of Minnesota football team in the late 90s and early 2000s. I had a brief time in part of the University of Minnesota marching band where I played trombone. So prior to being on the football team, I was actually part of the marching band.
I love that. How long did you play trombone? Did you continue into college, or was that kind of the
I,
end of
I
it?
did continue to play trombone in the concert band, so that was outside the marching band throughout college. And unfortunately, I've had since put the horn down. It's just a difficult instrument to play by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand that. Well, I have nothing but love for the Golden Gophers. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing that about your history. I also was a Big Ten college athlete. Nobody ever believes it, but it's true. So I love, love, love learning this kind of stuff. All right, so we're gonna go on and move on into questions today. Let me stop sharing my screen. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into some questions. Now, we had some questions worked up for you based on stuff people asked us when and were interested in for today's event. But if you have questions and you want to go in deeper to those, please, please feel free to let us know. I prefer personally if you put them into the Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar. But if they end up in the group chat, it's no problem. I'll just grab them out of there as well. So if at any point we're going over something and you want us to dive in deeper on a term or anything at all, please, please feel free, shout it out in the chat. You all took the time out of your day to be here with us live. No offense to everybody watching in the future. But you took this time to be with us. So we want to make sure we reward you for that and that the time that you spend with Power to Fly and Elastic is worth it. So if you've got questions, ask them, y'all, because that's what we're going to prioritize today. All right, Morgan, to get us started here, a lot of people think that leadership involves standing into a very specific box. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand how authenticity can help you create a culture where that authenticity is encouraged and valued in your employees. How would you say you've created this culture within the groups that you've been a part of?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think it's happened iteratively over time. And so I'll talk about this if there's an opportunity to speak a little bit more about my background or experiences. But when I think about authenticity, I think it's more of an experience versus a destination. And so what I mean by that is early in my leadership career, I often felt that maybe I was faking it till I make it, so to speak. And that was often described as like this imposter syndrome. But what I'd suggest now, despite reading a variety of books or being subscribed to a number of white papers, is having the courage to be my authentic self, having the permission and the power and the autonomy to say no to things where I've always been instructed to say yes, but being vulnerable in a way where I'm also willing to share my feelings, my thoughts, and perspectives without the fear of retaliation or a negative consequence.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. It's people when people feel safe to be their authentic selves, they're not quite so worried about, like you said, fitting into that box. And so if you are able to set that standard for people, I think it definitely encourages others and makes them feel more secure in bringing who they are to the workplace. And honestly, who you are in all the facets can be very valuable no matter what room you're sitting in. And people don't know that until they know certain things about you. So yeah, I like this response. Okay. One of the other things that people had kind of questioned was how to balance whatever your own leadership style is with maybe the more like corporate demands, or kind of changing up your style, maybe if you're a little bit more casual. Has this ever been something that you've had to deal with when it comes to moving into a new place within leadership?
It certainly does. And Meg, even maybe for the purposes of this interaction, maybe let me share a story and then I'll build up to the questions. I traditionally like to think I have a different perspective, and sometimes it's a little bit atypical. But as a result, I'm hopeful that maybe some of my atypical responses and or perspectives might provide some insights that you wouldn't normally extract in a conversation or an interaction such as this. And so what I'd like to do is talk about authenticity. And so, like alluded to, Meg, I've read a number of books, whether that's Authentic Leadership, The Art of Authenticity, The Courage to Be Disliked. I've read a number of them. And I always take like nuggets away from these books. I think at the end of the day, the theme that emerges in any of these books or scholarly journals is one, you need to be vulnerable. Two, I think you need to always ask for help. But three, there's this moment or this instance where you need to like self-reflect. While all that is true, what I would suggest is actually, and I alluded to it, I believe that authenticity comes from experiences. Okay. I think far too often people describe authenticity or they look at it in a way where it's a checklist. I forget if I do X or Y or Z, am I being authentic? And I don't think authenticity comes in the form of a finish line. I believe that it's a journey or it's an adventure and it's steps along the way that give you the courage to be yourself, but it's iterative. Like I might think I'm being authentic today, but I'm going to continue to grow and evolve as a person. And so likewise, so will my authenticity. Like when I was coming into this particular discussion, I was like, what is even the definition of authenticity? I think it's really just what I read. It's just the quality of being real, the quality of being genuine. But from my standpoint, I think it's a combination of like experiences. I think it's also tying that into wisdom. But as alluded to, I think it's also something that matures over time.
Mhm.
So I want to kind of continue to talk about this because I've had some big aha moments. And so I view authenticity different than maybe how I would have 5, 10, or 15 years ago. So what I would say here, Meg, and to the rest of the group is August 12th, 2022, just 2.5 years ago, not even 3 years ago. Unfortunately, my dad passes away at the young age of 68 after a very short battle of cancer. Now, I bring that up because in a weird twist of fate, my grandmother, his mom, passed away just a couple hours later, also to cancer.
Oh, Morgan.
Yeah. I share this though because it ties into authenticity. Now, I've extracted a number of things from books. I've been exposed to, again, scholarly principles through executive leadership programs, through my MBA program. But it wasn't until, August 12th, 2022, where I realized that indeed authenticity is like a sum of experiences. And so the big inflection point for me, and I think about this every single day, the inflection point for me was that after losing my dad and losing my grandma on the same day, I came to this point, Meg, and the rest of you, that life is short. And that has changed how I show up every day. And so I say this because since then, I like rhetorically ask myself questions. I look in the mirror and I ask myself, am I who I think I am? Am I who others think I am? Do I care? Should I care? And then I even start asking questions like, am I just a carbon copy of my parents? Like many probably also ask yourselves the same question. I think I vote the same as my parents did. I probably have similar religious views as my parents did. So am I truly my authentic self? Am I a carbon copy of my parents? Or am I even like a robotic version because I was raised and grew up in a certain swim lane. And
Mhm.
so when I talked about like this idea of the imposter syndrome, I continue to think and reflect upon like what that actually is. And so I'll tie in imposter syndrome here because imposter syndrome, I think, and I believe it's this concept where people just don't have the confidence in who they are, yet a lot of this imposter syndrome philosophy is actually more commonly associated with high achievers that are faking it till they make it. But as I reflect upon my career, particularly like early career leadership, I think that has diminished over time. And I think now it's even like just gone way behind me since August 12th, 2002, 2022, excuse me, where I realized that life is short. So I'll try to, speak to these questions and comments, but I think I would probably just talk about authenticity a little bit different than any other forum or any other person that would traditionally speak to these things. Because from my standpoint, authenticity comes down to really three discussionary points. I believe that authenticity is experiences. I believe it's wisdom that you acquire through traditional or non-traditional learning. And finally, I think it's iterative and it's something that's refined over time. Now, I'd love to talk about, what experience is and how I've maybe further augmented my authenticity, but let me just pause there to see if there's any comments or questions, or if we should kind of continue down this path. Again, this is for you and by you, so we can take this in any given direction.
Yeah, we've got a comment from Kathleen O'Neill saying you get more courage as you age and go through more challenges in work settings. So sorry for your loss. And that's actually echoed by a lot of people. Thank you for sharing that with us too, because I know that sometimes bereavement issues and things like this can be really difficult or be
Yep.
painful to share. So we appreciate you sharing that with us. Um, Kathleen also says this one's resonating big time. I lost my dad when I was 12. Jerry Zara said it's always the journey versus the destination.
Yep.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Sunny Webster, or sorry, Sunny Weber chimes in saying, one of the ways I've overcome imposter syndrome is through others pouring into me. They have told me that I belong in the room and that I am the expert in my topic. I know things that others in the room don't, and it's helped so much. That is massive. Yeah. I mean, especially when you see yourself, like when you see the reflection you are getting back from other people, it's kind of interesting. Zenobia is asking, is your authenticity determined by or adjusted to the environment?
I think, it still remains a work in progress for me because candidly, I don't entirely believe or subscribe to the fact that I am the same person at work as I am at home. I'm
Mhm.
still probably a little bit more buttoned up or operate in a little bit more of a professional manner than how I interact and communicate with my friends or with my family. So I would suggest that there's an authentic professional Morgan, and I would suggest that there's probably an authentic personal Morgan. Some people are the same wearing both shoes. I probably have a little bit of a divide, and that's something that I confront and I'm challenged with every day.
And it's also not necessarily something that you have to change if you don't want to. I tend to, so obviously I bring a lot of my personality to these events. A lot of what I do
Yeah.
depends on me being myself. But I also have, I consider it more to be like facets on a jewel or on a gem. So it kind of like might turn myself a little bit different so that these facets are showing off today because today's event calls for, some extra jokes or some, throwing stuff in there. But I might also kind of change it and dial myself way back if the situation that I'm in doesn't call for it. So like that, I really appreciate what you mean about how like if those two things are separate, that's fine, but you probably have a little bit of bleed over from one to the other that you wouldn't necessarily notice. And it's okay to show up in at work in different ways because you're a different person every day, like most of us are.
It's interesting though. I was, a couple of days ago, I was researching celebrities who authentically show up in them as themselves, regardless of the forum. Meaning, if they're in front of a camera or if they're at home. And there were like some names, consistent celebrity names that emerged. And maybe any of you can punch this in these names into the chat, but I think some of those names were Dolly Parton continuously
Mhm.
came across as an authentic celebrity, Betty White, Keanu Reeves, Oprah, Hugh Jackman, Drew Barrymore, all of them consistently authentic, authentic, authentic. And so I went on this journey. I was like researching all these people. I was like, why are they identified as authentic? And I couldn't find anything. And so then I went to each of their Wikipedia pages, and I did find some like themes that like emerged. And so one, many of these people that are perceived as being authentic, they've been exposed to like a variety of different environments, cultures, and people.
Mhm.
Two, I found in a point that you referenced, and I think I saw in the chat, many of those like celebrities that I just named up, I think are all over the age of 50. And
They're pretty
then,
close to it, yeah.
yeah, the third item was many of them faced some type of major life event and or trauma, which resonated with me just as I shared that example of my mom or my grandma and my dad passing away just a couple of years ago.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense though, because I mean, it's like we had said earlier that you these things come with age and experience. And while you might not be up skill wise with some of the ignorant young whippersnappers that you're in rooms with, being a person who exists on the planet is a whole other education in and of itself. I mean, I know that I think you're right, trauma tends to reveal who we are or kind of melt us down to that baseline a little bit quicker. But yeah, I mean, I know that I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago,
Yeah.
but I have kept growing and iterating through those versions. So I'm not really, I'm not, I'm not a different person in like the core ways, but I might have a little bit more confidence in myself now that I've been in spaces that I had those either positive or negative experiences that helped me learn who I actually was.
Yeah. Yeah. Looks like Kelly Clarkson was another example there as well.
Yes, absolutely. Sumo Roy is also saying leadership comes with responsibilities that how good you are about how good you are at channeling positive energy to your team because you're impacting others and for better or for worse in their work and personal life. That is very important to say. Thank you, Suma. All right, let's see. We got more questions in here. Okay. Do you have any practical strategies for cultivating confidence and inspiring others through those genuine interactions? So let's say you are bringing your authentic self to work and you are trying to make sure that others are inspired to do that. How do you, like, what do you do in practical matters? Are there ways or tricks that you use to bring out that authenticity in your team members?
Yeah, so I think inevitably a lot of it comes down to like modeling a behavior, but
Mhm.
modeling behavior also takes practice on my own end. So if I want to be vulnerable, I have to know how to be vulnerable. And so some of that comes through self-reflection. Like I'm not a journalist. I don't engage in meditation. So it's like, well, how do I reflect on being a person that I can be approachable with the teams that I lead, manage, and or interact with? For me, then, if I think about how I can engage in self-reflection, for me, it's walking. I walk every day and I sit in a sauna every day. And so as a result, I often, encourage my team members to think about how do you self-reflect? So many of us, particularly in a virtual environment, have shortened our lunch breaks. And more work, we slam down some yogurt in the middle of a call and we simply just turn off our camera as we eat for 8 minutes. And you don't get that opportunity to reflect. I have found that I am at my proverbial best when I do indeed legitimately have an hour break. And for me, I usually go on a walk. But I also, tell my organization that you have my permission to fail as long as you fail fast. And so, over time, specifically as a sales leader, I've had examples where, I've had sales reps so like, Morgan, I'm sorry. I lost a $600,000 deal. I thought it was going to close last Friday. I forgot to ask a few critical questions. Don't fire me. And the thought is like, no, I'm not going to fire you. It's just a mistake. And
Mhm.
let's just treat this as a $600,000 training opportunity. And ideally, if we're looking at it that way, then it shouldn't happen again. So what I'm doing then is creating an environment or a platform where they can share their emotions, they can talk about their mistakes, and they can do it in a way where they're just being honest.
Mhm. Well, I mean, you also think about it. One of the reasons that, we want people to fail fast is part of it is because our brains are not wired to learn from success. They're just not. Success doesn't really teach you anything other than, yay, that worked, but it doesn't tell
Yeah.
you like how you could be doing it better or whatever. And when you create a culture where failure is okay, then it frees people up to try and think outside the box. Because if you've got problems that you haven't gotten solutions to by now, you need to change something about the equation to try and get those different results that you need.
Yeah.
Let's see. Zenobia is chiming in saying, I love that you just made that point because space has to be created for vulnerability. She's right. It's an intentional vulnerability setting. As if you don't make sure people know that, I think it also speaks to how many of us did not have access to an environment like that. So like if that's the environment you're trying to build, say it loud and often because you want people to understand this is what you're engendering from them. Like it's okay to fail fast and fail forward was one of the first things I learned when I came to Power to Fly. And the whole point of it was you're going to try, and that's great. But if you're trying to jump across a chasm, you don't like get all the way up to the edge and go, oh, no, no, I changed my mind and back it up. No, 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 no. Go, jump, see how far you can get to that other side. We'll be here to catch you. It might suck, but we'll figure it out and then we'll iterate and do something different. Because as long as you're changing things and learning from the experiences, then, like you said, that's not a mistake. That's a training exercise.
Yeah, but you're right. And conversely, though, I've also observed scenarios, in myself included, by being so vulnerable, you then fail to set appropriate boundaries.
Okay,
And so
that
for
leads us
me,
really good. Yeah.
it was important to share that perspective related to my dad and grandma to show that I'm human, to humanize the experience. But now, because if people think I'm human, I also have to ensure that I'm also setting boundaries so that I'm not taken advantage of. And so people
Yeah.
lose sight of that as well as just the balancing that's often required in being vulnerable. And so I often tell specifically my leaders the importance of like setting boundaries, and that could be in the form of setting time limits. Someone throws a calendar invite on your agenda for a Tuesday at 4 o'clock, and it's a 2 hour meeting. It's okay to say, no, I only have an hour versus accepting that 2 hour meeting where you had 5 o'clock parental responsibilities from picking up your kids at daycare and putting food on the plates before you take your kids to some type of sporting event. It's okay to set time limits. But I think humanizing that in a way where you're also using I statements like, I feel this is too long. I believe we should do X. I think there is a need to do Y. Setting limits is critically important.
Yeah, absolutely. So this goes in really nicely with a question that we were just about to ask, and Dr. Angela Pearson read my mind on what the next question was. How do you maintain that authenticity while navigating complex organizational politics and pressures? So obviously, depending on what room you need to be in that day or that moment, you might need to change a bit of like your which facets are showing off. What are some of the ways that you have found the ability to shift but still maintain that authenticity?
Yeah. So let's pivot here for a little bit. And in the
Okay.
spirit of doing it in a very candid and just authentic way, as you're looking and interacting with me, you'll know that see that I'm a person of color. And what I have found specifically, like in the last 10 years, there often aren't people that look like me in the room. That has forced me to behave or interact sometimes differently with C-level executives than maybe I would in a traditional environment where I see more diversity. And so there are indeed times where I need to think about how I interact authentically with different groups. for me, the key principle or strategy of being my authentic self, regardless of the forum or the demographic, is the art of using diplomacy. And specifically, what I mean by that is the art of making other people believe that your thoughts are their own. So I learned this from a former chief marketing officer. I reported to her. She was the only woman leader amongst a group of C-level executives. All would be described as traditional 50-year-old white male executives. And she was so profound and professional in the way she challenged the group. She would say to the CEO, Joe, have you ever thought about doing this? Joe, I'm concerned about the unintended outcomes of why. Maybe we should reconsider doing this. And what's so unique about that experience is, one, I also learned this art of diplomacy from a woman leader that was surrounded by male executives. And then two, I've used it in my own, but I saw those executives leave the room, and Joe in particular is like, oh, this is just I can't believe I thought about this. I can't believe I hadn't thought about this before. And he left the room thinking that he arrived at a conclusion on his own and did it in an independent way. But really, that was a very precise and calculated way that my chief marketing officer used in a room, doing so in a very authentic way, but using diplomacy to drive it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the through line in that is that you are who you are as a person. And for me, figuring out, now granted, fully like elephant in the room, I am white, have not had to code switch when it comes to racial equity or anything like that. But I have been the only woman in a room. I have been the youngest person in a room by 30 plus years. I've been in a lot of rooms that weren't really built for me either. However, it is for me, my through line is that I try and make sure that I know what I'm there to do,
Yeah.
right? So when it comes to these events, I know that I am here to represent somebody new to the conversation. And it's my job to make sure that all of you lovely people out there get your questions answered from this fabulously intelligent person. In other rooms, my job might be different, but that means that I can change my tactics for how I get that accomplished as opposed to changing myself. So I am unfailingly friendly and polite, welcoming. You are welcome. Whether you want to be here or not, you are welcome. So that's the energy that I bring to stuff. But you're right. It very much it is a burden that lays far too that it's BS that we even have it, but it lays far too
Yeah.
heavy on people who are already having to prove needlessly why they belong in these rooms, right? DEI doesn't just stand for DEI, it also stands for definitely earned it. So
Love it.
when we are talking, sorry, y'all, I'm fired up this week. It's been not nice in America lately. So, but no, I think this is very, very, very true, and absolutely something that should still be talked about because you code switching, it just, oh my gosh, just flames shooting out of my head. It really is one of those things where it's like if you are not part of it or you've never had to engage in it, you do not understand how exhausting it is, how much
Yeah.
mental and literal physical energy it takes to hold those walls in place. It's bonkers. So oh my gosh, just
Well,
fingers crossed we don't have to
thank you
keep
for
talking
sharing
about this
that.
in 2 years, right? Yes.
Thank you for sharing, Meg.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about some of those barriers to authenticity. Have you ever had a point where you felt intimidated by others in a way that you couldn't be your authentic self? And I want to ask this one because big dudes get intimidated too. So, has there ever been a situation where you were like, "Ugh, I don't think I can be my true self in this place. I need to hold back some or change certain things." Has that ever happened to you? How did you feel when that happened?
Um, yeah, I mean, tying off onto this discussion we just mentioned, most certainly, and that's because I often felt like I just didn't look like the rest of the room. Um, so to think about that, maybe let me share a little bit of an experience, and then inevitably how those experiences shape how I now respond. So I grew up professionally at Oracle, where I spent like 10 years of my early career experience watching and observing a lot of type A, beat my chest, hear me roar leaders, very profound, very strong leaders, but I wasn't that person. And so if I could rewind a little bit, I grew up in Harris, Minnesota, and it was a town of 854 people. 854 people. No stop signs, no stoplights, largely dirt roads. And it's interesting because they had one restaurant called the Cafe Stuga. It was a family-owned Swedish restaurant, and I would always sit around and watch like all these old people, and there would be like 8 or 9 people sitting at this big table or this big booth, and they were often really, really quiet. And they would take a sip of their coffee, and they would smile, they would look out the window, they would have a, one or two adjective that they would contribute to the conversation, like, yep, sip a cup of their coffee and smile and move on. And so I remember that being so profound, but I forgot about it over time. But I bring that up because as I've, continued to age and mature in my own professional right, I've come to the realization or aha moment that I don't need to present myself the same way that those Oracle leaders did early in my career. Meaning, I've been exposed to so many groups and so many sessions where it's like, say yes to everything, say yes to extracurricular activities, say yes to joining the networking group, say yes to X, say yes to Y. But conversely, what I have found for me is the power of saying no. And with that, that has just been so instrumental in terms of setting priorities, being my authentic self, not engaging in activities that don't align with my personal interest and or integrity. And so, when I show up into a room, I don't have to be the loudest in the room. I don't have to be a traditional or proverbial one-upper, meaning after someone shares a perspective or insight, I have to add a comment on top of theirs to show that I have value as well. That I'm okay being quiet. I'm okay um, showing up in a way as long as I contribute to the discussion that is meaningful and impactful.
No, I mean, I think you hit like 16 points right on the head there, right? There are plenty of people that only want to chime in because they want to be seen to be part of the solution, or they want to like keep their profile high. And I think it is really important that we recognize when those things are happening, not only so that we can kind of take it in stride, but also so we can handle the situation better. And maybe not get whipped up about somebody trying to take over like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I love this. This is really good.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe a comment to add on that
yeah,
as you're
please.
looking at the questions, and I appreciate the facilitation. I would just suggest, maybe said differently, is like the older I get, the more I now know what I don't know. And
Yes.
when I was, early career, I thought I had life all figured out. But with maturity, with time and experience, again, the older I get, the more I now know what I don't know. And so it's just really interesting to be able to admit that to people, to admit that I don't know, the willingness to say no to projects. That's, again, that's come from experience. It hasn't come from books or learnings or webinars or formal instruction.
No, that is, and it's incredibly valuable. I mean, lessons learned outside the classroom sometimes stick the best. And I think that's really important. There's a lot of people asking questions about how you encourage that authenticity within your team, especially if you don't want to compromise like professional boundaries. Do you have any thoughts in this area?
Nothing that particularly comes to mind. Maybe rephrase the question just to ensure that I'm not interpreting it in a way that isn't aligned with how the folks are asking it.
Yeah, so it's coming from Dr. Angela Pearson. How, as a leader, do you encourage authenticity within your team without compromising professional boundaries or organizational goals? So I think it sounds maybe more of like a like how do you make sure that you're encouraging this without oversharing yourself? Um, because personally, that's how I would do it. I'm very book is open, whatever. Ask, I'm an open book. Ask whatever you want. I have no secrets. But it's also like you talked about. It's setting up those boundaries as well to make sure that you are keeping what you want private private. Had when it comes to setting up those walls and boundaries and saying no, have there been times when that didn't work for you so well, or you had to learn the hard way to set those boundaries?
Yes and no. I'm going to maybe try to address this maybe from a little bit of a different perspective, only because I don't have a concrete answer. But
Good.
what I could say is I do have some experiences that maybe align with this. And so, for any of you that have already sent me a LinkedIn connection or have looked at my LinkedIn background, I have been, fortunately and or unfortunately, a traditional job hopper. Every 3 years, I find myself bouncing to the next place of employment. There's some positives. There's certainly also some opportunities or shortcomings as a result. Now, what I have found in that experience is that what's culturally acceptable at one company might not be culturally acceptable at the next. So, an example of that is in a prior place of employment, I was attempting to model a behavior, particularly outlining a certain sales expectation and how we go about our business day in and day out. And while attempting to share with my organization what good looks like, I talked about my most successful sales year from a financial perspective, some of the things that I did, and as a result, how it impacted my W 2s. Now, while I felt this was a process of being vulnerable and showing credibility and showing, the positive impact, I later learned by just, through the proverbial drinking fountain or the rumor mill, that a lot of people thought my comments were a little bit pompous or arrogant because I shared, my earnings in front of a large group. That wasn't the intent, that wasn't the design, but because I've heard other instances or scenarios where people had had those discussions at other places of employment, it didn't work at the next. So what I would just suggest is that you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because sometimes authenticity or the conversations that we have, the norm, they are nuanced depending on the organization that I've worked for.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. There's going to be certain situations where a different tack is called for. And you're right. I mean, that it just kind of goes along with, like you said, growing and having those experiences. I'm a very big believer that up until 21, you're a kid, and once you hit 20, you kind of like start back over as an adult. So I'm
Mm,
38, which makes me like 18 in adult years, and I've sort of kind of got my feet under me. I kind of feel like I know what's going on. I feel very much like I did senior year of high school, where I was like, I'm an adult, I know what I'm doing. Come on. But I'm just now back to that now. And thinking like that made me feel a lot less insecure and a lot less unprepared when it was like, yeah, I'm new here. I've been on the planet for 20 years, but I haven't been in any of these rooms. I haven't been, like I had jobs,
yeah.
but I didn't work in a real job. So yeah, it makes a ton of sense.
It's interesting, just the cycle, the life cycles that are associated with time. Because I talked a little bit about, as a young kid going to the Cafe Stuga in the community that I grew up in, 854 people, watching these old people. And I always have kind of been intrigued by old people. I think there's a lot of lessons to be gleaned from older people. And it's certainly a matter of perspective. But often when we think about, elderly people, you think about how or why they have the courage to tell people to get off their property or slow down, or why might they be perceived as as crotchety. But for me, I have admittedly been a long time conflict avoider where I would bite my tongue. I did that personally and professionally. I would suggest, however, now as a middle-aged Gen Xer myself, I am probably starting to exhibit more of the characteristics or behaviors that you would commonly see with that elderly demographic. And that's just because I don't have the same type of fears that I once have. And so I had an appreciation for people sometimes that would ask stupid questions, not me. I would always go into a room and think about the questions that I was going to say, think about how I was going to say it and how I was going to articulate it, and do it in a way where I had a positive and meaningful impact and how it was being interpreted. Now I don't care.
It's nice, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't care.
Well, so I think it comes down to, like you said, you get more confident in yourself, you know who you are, you've been through enough situations that you know who you are and who you are not. And once you know that, it's a lot easier to sit on it. If you don't know that yet, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Literally 38, only got it, feel like I've got it figured out in the last like 3 to 5 years or so. So if that's not you right now, that is fine. All right, we've got more questions coming in from the chat, and we've got about 15 minutes left in today's event. So if you have a question, please feel free to send it in. And we will try and get to as many of these as we can. Let's see. Oh, we have a lot of people asking about pivoting to new careers or moving to new companies. So since you have done this a lot, you change roles every 3 to 5 years or 2 to 3 years, you were saying. What recommendations do you have, or what advice do you have for people who are going into a career change or might have to look to pivot in the near future?
Yeah. So this is something that I haven't learned in a book, and maybe it's just a shared experience. I've always felt that there's value in just building your equity. So for me, authentically, it probably is a process that takes time. I find that earlier on, particularly as I'm onboarding or ramping, the first 90 days, I'm relatively quiet. And that might be an element of being a collegiate athlete. Like when you first join a team or part of a professional or competitive environment, you just want to prove yourself. And that's what I've done professionally. I just want to prove myself. I want my work to speak to itself. But I think as you continue to onboard and interact in new environments or new scenarios, there are some things that you probably can do. I think there is a lot of value in sharing personal stories. I think there is a lot of value in being consistent with your behavior. I think there's some value in just asking and soliciting for honest feedback, being transparent. Those are some of the themes that emerge, or at least come to mind to me, as I've been that traditional job hopper, more or less so for the last 10 or 15 years.
No, I think these are all really good points. And y'all, if any of you also have good advice for each other or anything that's really worked out for you while job hunting or while looking to pivot, please feel free to share. We love learning from everybody, not just our guest speakers today. Let's see here. Ooh, okay. A lot of people, a lot of people resonated with what you had said about presenting authenticity, but being perceived as like overconfident or arrogant. Um, are there things that people should avoid doing or that you think kind of lead to this most quickly?
I think where people fail to do this in a way is failing to share the lessons learned or the failures that also happened in your pathway to success. So, like, reverting back to the scenario where I talk about, having my most financially successful year, I told them about all of the things that I did, or the strategies that I engaged in, or the collaborative or various interlocks of how I navigated the company. I only talked about the things that I did. What I failed to do is talk about the years of failure leading up to it and how I learned from those failures and what I didn't do in those scenarios and the unintended impact of my failures. That's where, for me, I made a pretty significant mistake.
No, it's my one job. I still lose my mute button at least once per event. No, that makes a ton of sense because like I say this until I'm blue in the face on this chat. If you are looking at someone who does something well, you are looking at someone who has failed a lot. We learn from that failure, and that's how you get better. That's how you figure out what your leadership style is, what your communication style is kind of by figuring out what it isn't, right? And so I think it is really important that we remember that in the moment of those failures or those mistakes of like, as long as you're learning something from the moment, it is valuable. You're not wasting that time, you're not wasting that experience. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Oh, another element of that though is EQ, or just emotional intelligence, and reading the room appropriately. Did I fail to acknowledge other people's perspectives? Did I misinterpret the room? These are things like in retrospect, maybe I probably failed at as well.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Sade's chiming in, saying having high EQ saves us a lot of the time. That's very, very true. I think that's, it's one of the very underrated skills, soft skills when it comes to navigating the professional workplace.
Very much so.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, this one was a good question. We've gotten a lot of questions from people who identify as introverts. Would you say that you are an introvert or extrovert or somewhere in the middle?
I would be curious to solicit perspectives and see what people. I would ask people to put in an E or an I in the chat and guess what I am.
That's a good
But I
one.
can tell you. So I've had the opportunity to take the Myers-Briggs personality assessment a number of times over the last 20 years. I'm seeing probably right now more I's than I am E's.
I've got two E's so far and one that is in the middle. Julie thinks you're a combo, like an ambivert. But yeah, most of them are I's.
So on paper, I show up as an ESTJ,
Okay.
the E standing for extrovert. However, in early career, I was very, very, very strong extrovert. However, there have been a couple of life events that have pulled me much closer now to the middle. So although I still show up in the middle to some of the comments that were captured here, I probably teeter-totter. One was the birth of my kids. After my wife and I, became parents, that just changed how I viewed the world. For me, life was now, how do I cultivate and raise our children in a way where I'm not just looking at them as children, but as my thumbprint on the world? That changed. And then to the story that I just referenced earlier, dealing with, the tragic loss of my dad and my grandma, that was another bigger loss where I'm like, yeah, I'm just much more intentional about how I communicate and interact with people. And so those life events, or those maybe traumatic events, things that I referenced with some of the themes that emerged with the celebrities, have certainly impacted me the same.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for dialing in on that with us. All right, we've got about 7 minutes left. I want to make sure we save a little bit of time at the end to talk a little bit more about Elastic. But before we do that, I've got one more question here that we'll go through, and then we'll kind of start wrapping things up here. Okay, this person wanted to know, how does Elastic provide flexibility and opportunities for growth while fostering that authenticity? So in your tenure at Elastic, what have you seen when it comes to that growth and development aspect of its people?
Yeah, and I know there's some other additional Elastic folks on the line, and you're feel free to punch in some of the things into the chat if you want to add some additional elements. So I've been with the organization since April 1st of 2024. So I just encroached or surpassed the 1 year mark. And as we think about our journey and think about our life cycle as a company, we're really getting into this part from a revenue perspective. We're a $1.5 billion organization, and so we're kind of going from good to great. And what I appreciate about the organization is allowing and creating a platform for people who've experienced success to drive innovation into the company, whether that's new and creative ideas from a product perspective, whether that's new strategies in terms of how we go to market, whether that's new philosophies and how we lead our teams and think about how we develop them, or deploying and investing in career development programs, whether it be in-role career pathing or formalizing more paths to promote from out of the organization. It's been a breath of fresh air. It's one of the things that brought me to the organization, but I think more specifically, living and breathing it, it's one of the reasons that's keeping me here. And thus, one of the reasons why I don't see the trend of me being that traditional job hopper continue the way it had historically in the past.
It's wild how much it changes when you finally find a place that feels more like a fit. Like, and I've had a wild career journey. I've worked in 4 different industries and I'm not even 40. And I'm telling you, that is the one through line that I have found is like once you start finding yourself in situations where you actually fit, it is wild how you ever thought that maybe some of the other ones might fit.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, but I love it. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we leave people with some extra information. One of the things that I like to ask, obviously I'm showing up this what you're seeing on the screen right now is Elastic's company page on powerfly.com. So if you take a look at that, you'll be able to see what they've got going on right now. So if you want to go over there, I'll throw the link in the chat thread in just a moment, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen in front of you. But one of the things that I like to ask at this point is, do you have any advice for somebody who is applying to jobs, things that they might want to interview with Elastic?
Yeah. So, I mean, one, for the various reasons and the things that brought me here was really culture and leadership and innovation. And I would reiterate that in terms of how you interview, or if you're thinking about or considering a career opportunity at Elastic, I would think about and suggest doing the same. How can you bring a cultural perspective from prior places of employment and or experiences to the organization where you can expedite the learning curves of others by sharing a certain perspective? Two is that, item around innovation. If you've seen success elsewhere, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. My manager welcomes his leaders. I do the same with my management team. If there is a thought, a rule, a go-to-market strategy where we can manipulate, change, or just augment to find additional synergies or efficiencies in the business, you have the platform and the permission. And in fact, you're encouraged to challenge the status quo. But I think the third piece is culture. It resonated for me in the interview process. And if you're thinking about an employment opportunity at Elastic, think about culture. Think about the ways in which we work. In my biography, I think it outlined my key leadership philosophies being around people, process, performance, systems, tools, data, and governance. And so I like to look at work holistically. It's not just about executing a task. It's about how and the ways in which we work with each other and how we're impacting not just productivity, but the people and the process and the ways in which we work.
Love that answer. Thank you, Morgan. All right, y'all. If anything that we have said today about Elastic has really piqued your interest, I very much encourage you to check out Elastic on powerfly.com. Now, they have a company page. That's what you're looking at right now. And if you follow the giant mouse, and you'll see I'm circling a big pink button up there that says follow. You'll find this on every company page on powerfly.com. If you're not seeing it, it's because you're not logged in. But what you can do is smash that follow button, and it does some really great things for you. If you are at all interested in Elastic, maybe you're actively job seeking, but don't see a role right now that suits you. By the way, they've got 203 roles on the platform open right now, so just FYI. But if you don't see anything right away that suits you, if you tap that follow button, it's going to allow Power to Fly to keep Elastic on your radar, because we will tell you when they post new roles. But the other thing we will do is we will tell Elastic that you're interested in working with them even before you fill out an application, which means even if there's not a perfect role for you to apply for right now, you stay top of mind for the folks at Elastic. Now, you can follow and unfollow as many times as you want, as many companies as you want, but obviously I recommend you take a look at Elastic. The other two ways that this page can help you, going into events and about will teach you more about the company. Same with company insights. If you want to search for available roles, you're going to go to this jobs tab right there. And from there, you can search and apply right to roles from Power to Fly. Now, one thing I do recommend, if you are directed outside to fill out an application elsewhere, make sure that you fully and completely fulfill your submit your application. The other thing is, if you don't apply via Power to Fly, that's okay. My feelings are not hurt. I recommend you apply through us or follow those links through us, if only so that there's an extra Power to Fly person with eyes on your application watching you move through the process. We don't change the results, and we're not going to make it more likely or less likely that you will get a job, but you've got a person apart from you who is following your progress through these things and wants to see you succeed. So if this was your first event with Power to Fly, I sincerely hope it will not be your last. Morgan, I very much hope we get to do this again soon because it was really lovely getting to chat with you.
Hey, I want to thank all of you and our friends at Powerfly for having me today. I appreciate the participation. And so if you haven't already done so, please feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn where we can continue this interaction, whether it be formal or informal. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. All right, y'all, that's going to be it for us today. But again, whether today was your first Power to Fly event or your 50th, I'm sincerely very glad that you came to spend time with Power to Fly and Elastic today. Go out and have the day y'all voted for, and I hope that we will see you back here sooner rather than later. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.